I mentioned this in a video a while back. One of the biggest issues you have in the United States is with white people is this concept that we're somehow European Americans. We are not European Americans. We are indeed white Americans. And you can tell this by the admixture. Let's get down to the conclusion here. I already went through this. This goes all throughout the research. But the thing is, white Americans are, number one, we are an admixture of every kind of European that came to this country. Okay, even the Pennsylvania Dutch are an admixture of Scandinavian, Russian, German, etc. So admixture dating, blah 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 blah. Let's see here. So I'm skipping down to the discussion, all the charts and stuff. You guys can read that on your own, but the ancestries of 23andMe customers and therefore the demographics of the database used for this study largely reflect the demographics of the U.S. as tallied in 2010 U.S. Census, blah, 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 blah. In this study, we focus on the distribution of European, meaning white, African, and Native American ancestries, and European subpopulation ancestries. These populations were selected because they had available reference data. Okay, so this is all about the pattern of genetic ancestry of self-reported African Americans. Okay, so what I want to point out is white Americans and black Americans. So white Americans are not European Americans. They are white Americans. Okay? Black Americans are not African Americans. They are black Americans. These are two distinctly different groups of people. With white Americans, the distinctions can be made much more so. For example, there are marked variances in Appalachian bloodlines than there are from, say, Midwestern bloodlines or Floridian bloodlines, or, you know what I mean? So, or Northwestern bloodlines. So my point is, you have, in my opinion, there are several ethnic groups for the various white Americans that are not being attributed, nobody is respecting that these people exist. And there is a right to self-determination under international law. But I think that Americans as a whole, I'm going to get into that later, but there needs to be more focus on what it means to be an American, both biologically and culturally, okay? So consistent with previous studies, the diversity of ancestry, blah, 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 okay, reflected in these researches, okay, so the small sample size means so Native American ancestry, okay, so though mean estimates of Native American ancestry are low, many African Americans carry detectable levels of Native American ancestry, consistent with historical narratives and family histories. Okay, so so an individual that carries more than 1% Native American ancestry can arise from one genetically Native American ancestor within the last 11 or so generations, or multiple genealogical Native American ancestors. For discussion, see how many genetic ancestors do I have online. Oklahoma shows the highest proportion of African Americans with substantial Native American ancestry. Well, that is because Oklahoma was originally intended to be the state of the Native Americans. It was supposed to be their homeland. So, blah, blah, blah. Oklahoma was the site of contact between Native Americans and African Americans after the Trail of Tears. Many people don't know this, but the largest group that owned slaves, that owned the most slaves in the United States, was the Cherokee. The Cherokee, and the indigenous Cherokee owned the most blacks. Okay, and then they were allowed to continue. There's a excellent video series called Red Master Black Slave. At least I think that's the name of it. And it's very good. I strongly recommend people watch it. and it shows the history of the blacks in the Cherokee community, and later how the federal government made the Cherokee give them full tribal membership, and then later how the Cherokee kicked them out of the tribe. They didn't want them in the tribe anymore. Okay, so Oklahoma was the site of contact between Native Americans and African Americans after the Trail of Tears, excluding individuals with no... now, what's funny about the Trail of Tears, well, you'd have to watch the documentary. It's a good documentary. Just watch it. So, patterns of genetic ancestry by Latinos. Okay, so... let's see, Latinos in New Mexico, yada, 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 yada. Okay, regions with higher Iberian, meaning Spanish ancestry, correspond to regions with greater Native American ancestry. Disentangling whether higher levels of Native American ancestry in the Southwest reflects the legacy of indigenous Native American ancestors or is the result of recent Latino immigrants into the Southwest. Well, it's both. Like, I don't know why they're there's nothing to disentangle there. It's both. Patterns of genetic ancestry of self-reported European Americans. So this is what you need to understand. This is what I'm saying. There are several different, really different ethnic groups amongst so-called European Americans, amongst white Americans. That's what they are. They're white Americans. And you're going to see this. It's both a biological and cultural difference. So regional differences in European subpopulation ancestry across states reflect known major historical migrations from Europe. Inferred British/Irish ancestry is found in European Americans from all states at mean proportions of more than 20%. And represents the majority of ancestry, more than 50%. So most Americans are of British origin, which makes sense, being that that's kind of where the United States came from. In states such as Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee, these states are similarly highlighted in the map of self-reported American ethnicity, meaning that they say they are American, which might reflect regions with lower subsequent migration from other parts of Europe, meaning that they don't have all these Eastern European, Polish people, German people, etc. Although there are a lot of Germans in places like, I think Alabama has a lot of German, if I'm not mistaken. But inferred Eastern European ancestry is found at its highest levels in Illinois, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. This is because we started importing these folks. You know what I mean? So we started importing these folks, and that's what was going on. We were importing them for use in the automotive industry and the mining industry. A lot of Russians, a lot of Poles, a lot of people like that. So Scandinavian ancestry in European Americans is highly localized. Most states show only trace mean proportions of Scandinavian ancestry, but it comprises a significant proportion, upwards of 10% of ancestry in European Americans. Sex bias and ancestry contributions. So they find evidence that sex-biased admixture processes, this is what you have to understand, this is when they compare the mitochondrial to the Y chromosome DNA. So estimates, blah, 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 suggest that under the demographic, European Americans might have 10 times as many female Native American ancestors as male. Now, why is this? Why is this? So, this is because white men, so European Americans might have 10 times as many female Native American ancestors as male. This is because when white Europeans came to the New World, there were not a lot of white European women, but there were a lot of Amerindian women. Also, a big difference is you could get Amerindian women for a handful of shiny beads, whereas white women were not as easy to obtain, so to say. So The thing is, European Americans might have 10 times as many female Native American ancestors as male, and African Americans might have 4 times as many female Native American ancestors as male. Sex bias in ancestry contributions might have been driven by unbalanced sex ratios in the immigration frontier settings. Robust estimates of African and Native American ancestry in African Americans. Several lines of evidence suggest that Native American and African segments represent true signals of Native American and African American introgression that occurred after the transcontinental migrations. African ancestry in European Americans is not likely to be driven by survey errors because the number of European Americans with African ancestry is 10 times larger than our estimates of survey error rates. Furthermore, the ancestry profiles of self-reported European Americans with African American African ancestry are distinct from all other cohorts. Their African ancestry is much lower than for a random sample of African Americans, and majority of these individuals do not carry any appreciable amount of Native American ancestry, distinguishing their ancestry profiles from Latinos. Why is that important? Well, what that means is Latinos tend to be predominantly white and Amerindian, or what would be considered white, meaning Southern European and Amerindian. That's literally what a mestizo is. Now, added to that is a small amount of black genetic material. A potential source of bias in their estimates is from errors in the ancestry inference algorithm, blah, 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 blah. Lastly, their recent dates for admixture suggest that introgression probably occurred in the Americas within the last 500 years. Hence, their estimates do not support that African ancestry in European Americans stems from ancient population events that predate migrations to the Americas. So, don't, like, all that we was stuff didn't happen. They was not the ancient Europeans. Correlations with population proportions. Correlations between state population proportions and mean ancestry proportions suggest that the numbers of African and Native American individuals in a state might have shaped the ancestries of the present-day individuals. No shit. For African Americans, the states with the highest mean levels of African American ancestry or black ancestry are, of course, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, are not those with the highest proportions of African Americans, given the highly significant statistics in European Americans. Surprisingly, in African Americans, the correlation of African ancestry with proportions of African Americans is only marginally significant. The correlation of Native American ancestry and African Americans with Latino state population proportion also has marginal, blah, 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 not okay, relationship of self-identity. Okay. Contrary to expectations, under a social one-drop rule, or rule of hypodescent, which would mandate that individuals... Now, this is what's important to understand. The so-called one-drop rule, which would mandate that individuals who knowingly carry African ancestry identify as African American. The probability of self-reporting as African American, given the proportion of African American ancestry, follows a logistic probability curve, suggesting that individuals that identify roughly with the majority of their genetic ancestry, individuals with more than 5% Native American ancestry, are more likely to self-identify as Latino. So keep that in mind. The more Native American a person has in them, the more likely they are to actually be Latino, not Native American. Okay? So the transitions between Latino, African American, and European American self-reported identity by proportions of African and Native American ancestry, blah, blah, blah. So this work demonstrates that the legacy of population migrations and interactions over the last several hundred years is visible in the genetic ancestry of modern individuals living in the U.S. There are results that genetic ancestry can be leveraged to argument historical records and inform cultural processes shaping modern populations, blah, blah. The relationship between self-reported identity and genetic African ancestry, as well as the low numbers of self-reported African Americans with minor levels of African ancestry. So what you have to understand is there are Black Americans that are virtually Caucasian, genetically speaking. Phenotypically speaking, they may look like an African American or what we consider an African American. You have to remember, as I said, so-called African Americans or Black Americans are a highly admixed people. Okay, moving forward. So, are there advantages to crossbreeding? Okay. You get better performance. The beauty of crossbreeding is that the offspring, so this is what you have to understand. Crossbreeding produces better offspring. Not necessarily better than the best of a certain group, of each group, but generally speaking, if you start with the mid-range, the crossbred individual will be better than both parents, okay? But not if the parents are exceptional. So this is evidence, not necessarily above the best trait of each breed. Okay, so the beauty of crossbreeding is that the offspring perform better than the average of the parent breeds, but not necessarily above the best trait of each breed. The reason that crossbreeding is beneficial is that you're dealing with multiple traits. And that's the thing, is you have to understand you are not dealing with isolated traits, you're dealing with multiple traits. If we are only looking at a single trait, a straight-bred animal might be better. Okay, this is evidenced in the milking ability of the dairy cow or the marbling of the Wagyu. A breed, okay, so if you want more milk production or more marbling of the muscle meat, you're going to want to straight breed the animal. So if you're looking for specific traits, it is better to basically look for that. However, when you're looking for general health and general performance, crossbreeding is where you go. So in the beef industry, they have many traits to focus on. They also have to deal with the environment, and heterosis gives a benefit there. So what heterosis is, it means genetic diversity, okay? The cumulative effect we get with heterosis is always beneficial. There is breed complementarity. We can look at how certain breeds fit the environment, their management, and each other. They used to talk about complementarity just from the standpoint of maternal and paternal breeds. Genetic trends for the beef industry have changed over the years. Back in the 70s, there was more spread for most traits than there is today. Now they are putting them together. The cattle that had lots of milk back then are no longer producing as much, and the ones that had just a little milk back then have increased milk production. Okay, so environment is important. This is what you have to understand. As Charles Darwin understood, natural selection favors the generalist. Okay, not the specialist, the generalist. Okay, and that's what crossbreeding gives you. Okay, so if you are in an environment that can provide for lots of milk growth and production, choose breeds that fit that scenario. If you're in a more limited, harsh environment, think about that, okay? I would always think about the harsh environment. The two traits it has the biggest impact on are the traits that have some of the biggest impact on. Now, remember, I'm utilizing this to think about human breeding, okay? So, A four-breed composite is probably where you get the most benefit for a substantial system. So what you're talking about here is 4 different breeds of people. So that might not be as drastic. That might be, say, like people of Arab. So most Italians have some Arab in them and things of that nature. Irish, German. You get what I'm saying? So moving forward. So one of the biggest problems affecting our republic is health and sickliness. What's important to understand here, like I said, when you're looking for general traits, crossbreeding produces healthier cattle. Okay, like many students who come blah, 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 crossbreeding cows in order that they can live longer, healthier lives is catching on. Crossbreeding cows so that they can live longer, healthier lives is catching on. There can be misconceptions about how animals are treated on farms, so educating the public about this and animal welfare is related interest, blah, blah, blah. Purebred Holsteins, she says, are the most popular breed in the Canadian dairy industry because of the large quantities of milk they can produce. But over time, Holsteins were so intensely bred for milk production that infertility and increased susceptibility to disease like mastitis, an infection of the udder, resulted. So what happens when you breed a line too thin is these animals become very susceptible to viral, bacterial, and genetic disease. The intensive breeding of the Holstein also resulted in inbreeding, which increases the occurrence of harmful recessive genes. You need to make smart decisions when you are breeding cattle to get the best of both worlds, high milk production in addition to better health. So that's the thing, is you need certain traits with better health. Health is wealth. Keep that in mind. Health is wealth. Okay, based on official animal registration, but okay, blah, 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 blah. This just goes into the details. You can read this on your own. Crossbreeding improves fertility. Okay, so here we go here. In pasture-based seasonal calving systems, failure to become pregnant during the breeding season results in important economic losses. Keep in mind that we are at a negative birth rate in the United States. That is not a good thing. Okay? So, okay, so maximum profit is attained. Maximum profit means more people is attained by minimizing costs and increasing the proportion of grass in the diet of lactating dairy cattle. Now, I'm going to get into the importance of food and following a more natural human diet. In the United States, dairy producers primarily strive to maximize production potential, but are becoming increasingly aware of the economic consequences of suboptimal cattle fertility and survival. For this reason, interest in crossbreeding is emerging. The objective of this paper, blah, blah, blah. Research conducted in Ireland during the early 2000s concluded that of 3 alternative dairy breeds, the Norwegian Red was most suited to seasonal grass-based production. A key finding was favorable, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is again going into the details. Take a look on your own. So when I come back, I'm going to talk about the history of Chinese Americans and migration of Chinese Americans into the country. The history of Japanese Americans and the Japanese colony in California. The history of Arab Americans and Indian Americans. Right here, Indian Americans. After that, I'm going to point out how fascism did not have the same views on race as, let's say, National Socialism. People try to lump them together. It's not the truth. Okay? and we're going to move forward here.